Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the worst upload schedule of all time. Because today I want to do a look back and look at kind of just like, okay, I was just scrolling the decks and I was like looking at this and I was like, bro, there's so many Pokemon on here that like fell off like hard. So today we're gonna be talking about that. If it goes well, maybe I'll talk about Pokemon that had a glow up. There's less of those, but it's probably more interesting. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of just planning on going through like kind of just like in order of like Pokemon that fell off like a little bit, then Pokemon that fell off like a little bit more, and then Pokemon that like Giga fell off. And like if you've been paying attention, you know the ones that'll be at the bottom. But yeah, it should be kind of funny. Conveniently, the first one is like probably just like Amoonguss. Like Amoonguss was like very, very good. Specifically in like pre-home, it was like one of the best ones. It's not like it was like completely uncontested, but it was like at a really strong position in the metagame because it was like very, very good into Iron Hands. I think if like you open its analysis, it's probably still like references like pre-home stuff. Yeah, looks like DLC one at the most. But yeah, Amoonguss was like really good early on in the tier's history. Just like standard Amoonguss things, and it's not like it completely fell off, but it's definitely like not like a serious metagame contender. I'd say for the most part. Like there's a handful of people that use it a fair amount still. Let's see where the VR go. But like a lot of the time, people are going to opt for like one of the other redirectors, one of the Ogre Pawns or the Sinistras of the world. And that's kind of just the main thing that changed for Amoonguss, like other redirection options. Like in like previous DOU tiers, like Amoonguss is one of like the only redirection Pokemon available, and that's kind of like one of the main forces like sustaining its niche. But in SV DOU, there are plenty of those, so not as much to like really like you know solidify itself as its own place. And the Ogre Punts are kind of annoying for it too, like being able to redirect Spore. Like most teams having the option to do that natively without having to rely on goggles is a big deal. But Amoonguss still has like plenty of things it can do, even if it's a little bit different than what it was doing earlier on in the gen. And that's mainly being like having like offensive coverage with Sludge Bomb. Pollen Puff is also pretty decent. So it's a good Pokemon, but it's not nearly as common as it was early on in pre-home. Let's see. Okay.
I think
Oh,
gold
I leaked my
structures like
builder.
really kind of fell into their like gold structures kind of came into place as well a lot more than they used to be.
No, that's not really
So
true.
that like
That's not really true.
GG. I got nuked.
Yeah, you got
I'll shut
nuked.
up now. Fuck me.
Well, I mean,
Screw myself.
gold has like always kind of been like around the same level of play. Definitely like now for sure, like it is a fair point. Like definitely now for sure, gold is like the most optimized it's ever been. But gold was like always a key contender. I guess you could say like gold like on top, like everything else on top of gold is like kind of annoying because like if it's just gold, then it's like fine. Like Mogus is actually like half decent partner for gold. In metagames where there's not like where specifically where like Incineroar is the best fire type. It's not that bad because like if you're dealing with like Chi-Yu, you don't want to have a Moongus and Gold on the same board, right? But if you're dealing with Incineroar, it's like okay. And then Moongus can like actually it's one of the few mons that can actually heal Gold, which is kind of nice. So some of the teams you'll see a Moongus on nowadays are like like Rain, and you'll see like Plot Gold with like a Moongus and stuff like that. But definitely Gold is a major mon in SV that does not. Old gens, that's pretty bad for it. Let's see. Okay, we're gonna talk about Armarouge, but that guy fell off a lot more. So let's see. What else can we talk about? See. Chiyu is like probably another one that's kind of in this like initial tier. Like Chiyu was like another really good one in like pre-home. And like honestly, like late pre-home, it like kind of fell off a little bit as like people came up with like more optimized Iron Hands teams. But definitely in pre-home, this was like one of the, like basically the fire type. There really weren't that many. It was just like kind of Arcanine and Chiyu. And Arcanine, while it does have some like decent traits, is not like the most incredible thing. So this was like pretty uncontested as like a fire type special attacker. Whereas like nowadays, like it's still around, but it's definitely like a tier three Pokemon as opposed to like tier two, right? So it's we're seeing it more of like specific pieces rather than just kind of being on like every team. So there's like a fair amount of teams with like Chiyu, Torn. The main thing I think that changed for Chiyu is just like, Incineroar's in the game. You can't really damage uh like Incineroar very well. Roy and Moon also being a little bit better now is a little bit annoying for it offensively as well. Torn being slightly worse. Although Torn is like probably doesn't really change in viability much, but it's definitely like I think it's more annoying to try to pair Chi with Roy and Moon than it is to try to pair like Chi with Torn. I think they just it has such natural synergy like powering up Bleakwind that it makes it kind of annoying. But yeah, I mean,
DOU still is good after Flutter got banned.
what sorry, what did you say?
Was Chiyu still like as used after Flutter got banned, or
So Chiyu Flutter was like actually like that's a really good question. So Chiyu Flutter was like the big deal that got Flutter banned the first time, back in like really early pre-home. But later when it came back, Fluttershy was actually like not as common a pairing as it was like early on in pre-home. And I think the reasons for this was because people like kind of experimented more with Flutter as like a general piece. Not to say that Chiyu Flutter wasn't like still around, but you think like people opted to use like other fire types that both paired well with like Flutter, but also matched it better into opposing Flutter, like Heatran or Volcanion, as opposed to Chiyu, which actually ends up getting nuked by Flutter Main Moonblast if you get like caught out of position or anything, or it takes any kind of chip damage. That was a big deal. I don't think like the sets for Chiyu have changed a lot. Like I think like the bulkier sets have still are still kind of the ones that kind of see play. Um, I think definitely you
did
see
they
like
used to
less
run
like
Grassy Seed
Scarf.
ever?
Yeah, they were at Grassy Seed like a little bit. That set is still like kind of around, but it just kind of gets like out offense by a lot of things in the tier. It's probably a little bit better now with like Roy Moon being good, but it was pretty bad into like torn stuff with like Lando. Yeah. So that's basically all there is to say about Chiyu. I think you definitely see like less of like Scar specifically, but like Specs still has like a really strong niche. It does like a lot of damage. But definitely like, some of these Pokemon that have fallen off, like well, just like a little bit. Iron Hands is like another one that we can talk about here. Iron Hands is still like a very good Pokemon, but it's kind of hard to like emphasize like how good like Iron Hands was in pre-home if you weren't there. Let's see if there's any like really good replays from the first DPL of the gen. Because Iron Hands, like, it actually got suspect tested, which is kind of unthinkable now. But it was just like, it just has so much more stats than anything else that was like legal in pre-home. And like Drain Punch is obviously like really good in combination with like SD or something. As well as like obviously Assault Vest is never going to be bad on this Pokemon. So this Pokemon, like it's like tier 2 or tier 3 now, depending on like probably how you feel about it. But this was like unquestionably like a tier 1 Pokemon for most of SV, especially like early on. Okay. Is there anything else that fell off like slightly?
I guess like what changed for hands to be like less good than was then?
I think definitely like Hands was better when there were like not really ground types in the game. So when like Hands was like really really good, the best ground type was Great Tusk. Now Great Tusk is actually like quite good into Hands, right? Like you have like a lot of defense, um, and like uh like you hit like Iron Hands, so like what ends up actually being like the weaker like defense side, which is defense because it doesn't have like a billion, like it has the Assault Vest, right? So Headlong Rush was like actually a really good way of removing Hands, but Hands could always just kind of Terra, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Um, Whereas something like Landorus being better, like really punishes those SD sets, which actually have to give up something meaningful by running AV. Whereas like not running AV didn't like really weaken you into like the best ground type before, right? And then obviously stuff like Okidogi popping up, both sets, like both AV and bulk up, kind of pushed Iron Hands out. I think these Pokemon are probably on similar levels of like good, like at the end of the day, if we're playing like really like optimally solved SV. But Okidogi definitely like ate into Iron Hand's niche. Even though it doesn't have fake out, it's obviously much better endurance than Aurora since it can't get intimidated and stuff like that. So it just kind of like had to contest with another fighting type, better special attackers. And yeah, like stuff like Chew Bundle being like really, really broken was like the kind of thing that like Iron Hands was like really good at dealing with, specifically in pre-home. Like you could just like run max Spadef and just like out trade everything in the tier, and that's just like not really the case ever after that. And then in like specifically in like the home meta game, you'd see a lot of like belly drum hands with Crest. And Crest is another good Pokemon we'll talk about next, actually. But you'd see these kind of teams, and like specifically Iron Hands Crest is not something you'd be able to get away with today. I think in terms of like the archetypes that are good. But like back in like the home metagame, that's what Iron Hands was doing. So like setup Iron Hands is still okay. AP Hands is still okay, but these are just not as like they're not as unpunishable as they used to be. Like these sets used to have like the best check basically just used to be Amogus. These Pokemon you could kind of noticing a trend here. A lot of these Pokemon were good because of like how they matched up into each other. and like with each of them like following out like more and more, like it's made like the rest of them like less relevant. But that's kind of like the case with these pre-home Pokemon. So Crest is our first like Pokemon that wasn't legal in pre-home. This was like one of the very defining Pokemon of like the home metagame. So if you're thinking about like the home metagame of DOE, we should actually pull up some replays. That's basically refers to like the first OSDT of the generation. That was like the main one, the main tournament of that period. There's definitely some sets in here that like are really Faye is going to be really mad at me for pulling up this game, but this is like a very when I think of like the home metagame of SV, I think of like sets like this. I've watched this back like somewhat recently, so it's like fresh in my mind. Where you'd see like a lot of like bulky stuff with like crests on both sides, and then like your SD or belly drum hands, and then like in this case, like a Plachu and stuff like that. And so like Crest was like really good at like enabling like these bulkier strategies with like screens that were like kind of better in this like metagame that was kind of was not nearly as like low power level as something like pre-home metagame, but like at the same time, the Pokemon we didn't have like all like the positional pieces we have now. We didn't have Incineroar that could like run like Taunt or Wisp or something like that. We didn't have like what else do you not have? You didn't have the Ogre Pawns, things like that, like things that could like be like more offensive. Like if you looked at like an Ogre Pawn and look at like Yoda's team, like Ogre Pawn actually 6-0s, even if regardless if it's Hearthflame or Wellspring. That's so funny. So like you'd see like these like really bulky teams with Crest, and so Crest would just like click Lunar Blessing buttons and Trick Room, and actually like Crest was so bulky in this tier that it actually got Ursaluna banned for a little bit. If you weren't like around then, you might have like not known that Ursaluna was like banned like in the home metagame because it got end banned like immediately after, like pretty much as soon as like the Ogre Pawns got introduced and Rilla got glide back. But actually in this tier, like Crest Ursaluna was like super oppressive, and so like it would just really support these like really bulky Pokemon with Lunar Blessing, and there wasn't like super great ways to wall break without using your own like setup Pokemon like you'd see here, like the Chi or like the heads. Like Flutter was like pretty good, but Flutter would always have to like choice lock into a move, and so that was like it didn't wasn't actually like that detrimental to Crest. Because if it's like clicking Moonblast, it's really not that bad for Crest. Like it'll take it pretty well. Its Spadef is quite good. So Crest is like kind of still around. But like I said, like the stuff like Incineroar, better utility pieces, the Ogre Pawns, just like generally more offensive conditions have made like Crest like not like a more specific Trick Room guy rather than just like blanket like bulky Pokemon that'll heal all its teammates and keep everything at full HP. But this is definitely like still like a relevant Pokemon. I think like the most relevant team is the team that I used a lot in OST2 is like Torkoal, Ursaluna, Crest, Rilla, Hearthflame, Diancie. So it still plays well with like Trick Room stuff, but it's less good on like this like kind of setup spam stuff that was kind of like what kind of sustained it. Not like it always ran Trick Room, but it was the most less about the Trick Room than it was about like the just like Lunar Blessing, you know? And that's the kind of value that doesn't really exist, I think, right today. Okay, what else?
Bundle?
Bundle. I think Bundle, we'll talk about that guy later. That guy Giga fell off. I think Gambit is another good one. With pretty clear implications. We won't spend too much time on this one. But this Pokemon was kind of always like a tier 3 Pokemon. It's probably now like more of a tier 4. Pretty good like win condition. Like in the right position, King Gambit is still like really threatening. But what changed for this Pokemon obviously is like kind of the rise of Lando I, uh, as opposed to like Lando T. So when like we're thinking about like home or like DLC 1, Lando 2 is like a really good Pokemon, and that kind of like sustained King Gambit. Because Lando 2 doesn't actually even break King Gambit that well either. But Lando I just like obviously farms it, and that's like a Pokemon that you're going to see on like a lot of teams, and it just wall breaks can give it really well, and it also doesn't give you the Defiant boost. So that's kind of a clear. There's another like home era Pokemon that's like fell off just because better stuff got added to the game. Also, the better redirection Pokemon is a big deal for King Gambit as well. Like having to deal with Follow Me all the time makes Sucker Punch like a lot more reliable, a lot less reliable. Kumo, kind of around the same relevance as it had. Mew is another one from this metagame. I think Mew was always like a little bit, I don't know. I think it was kind of new toy syndrome in the home metagame, but I did see like a fair amount of play with like rocks and like tailwind, pollen puff, and stuff like that. I used a lot of it myself. Eventually, I realized it just wasn't good, so I'm not sure it was ever good, but it definitely sees less play now. Now we could talk about bundle or like
Volcania.
yeah, we'll talk about the let's move on to I guess to like the DLC one Pokemon now. So okay, the first up we have like the two fire types. We'll talk about them at the same time because like the conditions that made them good and the things that like made them less good are kind of the same. So Volcanion and Heatran were like the three fire types of DLC one and of like the home metagame, but DLC one got a lot more optimized because we were playing SPL during DLC one. These were like the three meta defining fire types that would like be used in like this Flutter main metagame. And so Heatran and Volcanion both have like quite good matchups into Flutter Main. Volcanion like has a little bit less Spadef, so it's maybe a little bit less so. But Heatran specifically had like an excellent matchup into Flutter, especially with like AV or something. Sometimes they'd even run like Heavy Slam. Sometimes you even see Heavy Slam on Volcanion, but that was like always kind of LARP. I'm not gonna lie. But so yeah, these two fire types like they just switched on Flutter like a lot better than something like the more offensive Chi, and they also had like decent, like specifically Volcanion was like pretty good at like damaging like Lando T and like it has a lot of defense, so Lando T couldn't like kill it in one hit and stuff like that. And they're also like not that bad into the Ogre Ponds. Volcanion I think retained more of its viability because like I'd call Volcanion like slightly better than Heatran. They're both like kind of like similar levels of like not used that much in today's metagame, but I think Volcanion has like a stronger niche because Steam Eruption is such a good move. But yeah, these Pokemon were just so good at dealing with Fluttermane, and they were just like staples of these teams you'd see. Let's see. Well, it's another very good game we can probably pull up, showcasing what teams kind of looked like at that time. Let's see. It's probably here somewhere. What I'm thinking of. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of like what a lot of teams looked like this time. Okay, it's not as good as an example as I thought, but it's like you'd see your Lando T, your like fire type, and then often you'd see Flutter. For some reason, these teams have gold. Gold was like okay in this format, but it was not that good. Usually, these teams would have like Flutter instead of gold. That was kind of what like your typical team looked like: fire type, like Heatran, Volcanion, Q, Fluttermane, and then like Lando T. We'll get to Lando T in a second, but uh, these guys were like kind of like the staples of this metagame. And so without Flutter, like these lost a lot of their niche. You'd start to see like more Incineroar as well. Like Incineroar being in the game also pushed these guys down after it was added in DLC too. So that's like another thing. So these mods they just kind of like lost their like one niche, which was always just like switching in on Flutter and like dealing respectable damage to it back. But like I said, Volcanion still has some use. I think Volcanion is like a Pokemon people need to explore more, specifically with like Roaring Moon, I think it pairs quite well. Whereas like Heatran is kind of gutted in this gen because it doesn't have Eruption, which is like the main thing sustaining it in Gen 8, where it's like pretty good. And whereas like Heatran is not that good in like Gen 7 or Gen 6. It's really just like having like fast Eruption in Gen 8 that makes it like a key dividing piece. Whereas like Volcanion is like always like kind of relevant. I think Heatran is just kind of washed. But regardless, both of them, and then Lanto I becoming really good. Uh, because it's another case of like where we were talking about like pre-home of like the Pokemon kind of feeding into each other, right? So like when you had like Lando T, like Flutter, and like these four Pokemon, like Lando T supports your Flutter and beats like these guys, and then Flutter beats Landorus most of the time, but like loses to these guys. So it's just kind of like this dynamic. So once you take out one, it kind of like changes the complete dynamic. So Lando T being a ground type, like pairing incredibly with like fairy type like Fluttermane, right? That makes just makes sense, right? It was like very good because that intimidate could like kind of like help Flutter with this like really really low defense stat, which was always kind of like pretty big deal in this tier. We never actually got around to like really like a lot of development DOU had has been similar to like what like you could see in like Reg F. But we never actually got around to like the T wave like bolt flutter stuff. That was kind of a thing. Like it just like didn't develop that far. Like we did see like booster flutter, but it was more like looking icy wind and stuff. And I don't think anyone that's actually running bold. So Lando T was like a really big deal for flutter. And like as soon as you took out flutter, like Lando T had like no reason to be used over Lando I. And then you look at this mod and it's just like it's best ground move is stopping tantrum. Like Earthquake is like okay, but it's an inconsistent click as usual, especially with like Rilla around. Um, and like U-turn pivoting is good, but it's just like this Pokemon doesn't do anything when you compare it to like Lando I, which is just like the goat and just clicks like the strongest move in the game. So as soon as you take out like Lando T, it's like it's just kind of like doom for all these Pokemon. Like Heatran, you know, both of these guys, like when they Terra, they can be like pretty good into like Lando T, but like if you're Terra grassing like one of these Pokemon, it's just gonna like get sludge bombed. And so it doesn't like actually like give you that much mileage. So like Lando I becoming like better, not good. So that's kind of like the main story of these guys. Lando T is an interesting case where I've always wondered if like we were just underrating Lando I the whole time. And I think it like might have been done to some extent, but Lando T I think was definitely like just better in a lot of ways. But I think Lando I was kind of always underappreciated when like Flutter was around and stuff like that. And so it's like I don't know. So Lando T is an interesting case because when you look at this Pokemon now, it's just like why would I ever use this Pokemon? Like literally ever. The only things I've seen it do is like you can run like Scarf with like Terra Blast Flying, which was like the set that it would run back then, but um now it's kind of locked into that set versus like before it had a lot more room to just like click rocks or like U-turn or just like sometimes you'd even see like clear amulet, stuff like that. Um but yeah, this Pokemon, all of these guys were just like they fell off really hard after Flutter got banned. Unfortunate, really. Okay, yeah, we could talk about Bundle now. So Bundle is kind of like a Bundle is a funny Pokemon. So this was like a very oppressive Pokemon in pre-home. Like a very, very oppressive. Because for context, right? Like when SV DOU was first a thing, everyone was using like Chew Flutter, and it was just like so ridiculous. Like there's just like nothing in the game that really switches in on like Terra Fairy Moonblast with Beads of Ruin active, right? So that just kind of like eviscerated everything, and like Flutter Mane was like quickly removed. There were some people that actually like wanted Chew to be banned instead of Flutter, which is kind of an interesting hypothetical of what if we'd done that instead of like banning Flutter, which I think banning Flutter was like almost objectively correct, and there weren't that many people arguing for banning Chiyu, but it would have been interesting, I think, to say the least. So as soon as like Flutterman got banned, people started using it with Bundle instead. Now, Chiyu Bundle in some ways is actually even worse to have good than Chiyu Flutter because I mean in both cases, like the offensive coverage between like Freeze Dry, the option of clicking Isu the option of clicking Hydro Pump, is just like ridiculous when you're pairing it with Chi-Yu, which we can just like between like freeze dry, water moves, and like fire dark, it just kind of like nothing really switches in safely like at all. And then like sometimes they'd even be running like one of these mods would be running like Terra Blast, and it'd be even worse. So it's basically just like nothing switched in on Bundle Chi-Yu except for Iron like Assault Vest Iron Hands, and so that's like what made Bundle like so incredibly strong. So like when you remove like when Chiyu got weaker, we got Flutterbane back in the tier. We got actual speed control options instead of like Murkrow. Like we were really this was really the only Prankster Tailwind in the game, man. We were down bad. So like all of that made Bundle a lot worse. So now it's actually not like another like thing that's kind of easy to forget. So like even if you're talking about like Murkrow, right? Let's say you want to run Murkrow Glamora. Like you run Tailwind with your fast guy, and you'll click Tailwind and you'll outspeed the Iron Bundle. But the problem is Iron Bundle is and Flutter, but especially Bundle, they're just so fast that like the barrier to like being faster than them when they have Booster active is literally to be like 300 speed or more. And so that there were just not that many Pokemon that were actually that fast in the pre-home metagame. And so that was like a really, really big deal. The fact that you couldn't use like the alternative speed control options were both bad, and then when you were pairing them with anything else, like, they would not like actually be fast enough to like outspeed Bundle with the booster energy. So your options were run like really like bulky Iron Hands with like Trick Room, which was definitely like real. You'd see like Indeedee like Trick Room and stuff with like Iron Hands, and things like that, like other Trick Room setters. There weren't that many of them, but like there were enough, like for a graph, etc. Same things like that. And that was like kind of the only way to get around bundle. But the problem is like it could also like learn taunt and stuff. So it was just like a really specifically oppressive combination in the context of that metagame. So as soon as we got like better speed control, faster Pokemon in general, uh, bundle became like a lot less oppressive because you could actually like control the speed and like get Tailwind up and click like Earth Power into it and like knock out the bundle. So uh, just definitely just like got worse over time. And it's like okay now, but it's not really that good. Sometimes you'll see it like clicking Blizzard next to Ninetales, which was like a niche it didn't even have at the time. Um, but like, yeah, this Pokemon just fell off hard. It's not like the worst in the world, but like it was just genuinely like almost impossible to switch in on this duo if you like didn't have speed control up or like um the other things that could do it was like T-Tar. So T-Tar was like another one, I guess you could say like slightly fell off because it was specifically like really good in pre-home. And this is a Pokemon that I don't think I really appreciated enough at the time in pre-home for just like how well it beats these two. But even still, like it's still taking like Beads of Ruin, Hydro Pump. Like you have the sand, so it'll be okay. But like it's still like a lot of damage. It's not a perfect check. Okay, I think we're ready to talk about Pokemon that fell off even harder. So I think first up to talk about in this case, there's only a couple of them now that fell off like really bad. I guess okay, I'll talk about like Dragapult first because this Pokemon was not like too good enough to like be considered like have seriously fallen off. But this Pokemon saw specifically a lot of play with like Chen Pao in like the 2024 SCL, like in like the late Arch metagame. And so like Burns was running it like a lot in that tour, with just like Terra Ghost, Terra Blast, just like a ridiculous amount of damage when paired with like Sword of Ruin. Um, but really, this Pokemon is just so frail. If it gets like any kind of speed control like out of its favor, like it becomes a lot more difficult to get progress with. And like obviously, it also is like really bad into Roid Moon. So Roid Moon being better is not good for it. So this Pokemon like I think you could still win games with it for sure. It just I haven't really seen it brought, but I think like conceptually, I don't think it's like fallen off that hard because it was like it's not like it was the most common in the world, but I definitely used to see more play compared to now. And I think like it'd be kind of interesting to see if someone could like maybe make like something like this work again. Probably these three, but definitely does not see a whole lot of play. Let's see. Entei, not really that good to begin with. I don't think it's really worth discussing. Um, okay, so we're ready to talk about Armarouge. Now, this is like really funny. Like, I still can't believe they gave one Pokemon expanded force in the whole game. Like, so basically, before DLC 2, this was the only Pokemon in the entire game that had expanding force. And so that was like enough to like warrant its usage like by itself. Um, which is like just really funny. So you just see like Life Orb, Trick Room, Heat Wave, and like Fire Psychic's really not that bad like offensively. So this was like a serious like mon you had to like keep in mind, like at least in the back of your head like a little bit, at least through like DLC one. I think it was definitely best in like home and like pre-home, but it was also around in DLC one. I think so. It's like it was around, but now there's just like no reason to ever use this Pokemon. You use better Pokemon with expanding force. Even like Hatterene is like probably a little bit better. Even Hatterene's not that good, or like Hoopa or something like that. The thing is, like expanding force clickers are still like not the greatest, but you never choose to use Armarouge instead of like Iron Crown. If you're using Side Spam, you're going to use Iron Crown or Hoopa, depending on how fast or slow you want to be. So this Pokemon was just kind of like it had like an artificial niche. Flashfire was also like kind of nice in the earlier tiers, but you know now like Incineroar's in the game. That's really annoying. And so now, I mean, the last time I saw this Pokemon, it was like weak armor, weakness, fallacy, cheese, which was always around, but never that good. Um, and it's just kind of funny. I just like, why did they give this thing expanding force? It does have Meteor Beam now, which is kind of nice to hit instant, but again, there's just like, if you're gonna do that, why would you not just like use like Necrozma with Meteor Beam? Like kind of what it does in Gen 8. Okay, and the last Pokemon I want to talk about, the Pokemon that had the biggest fall off of all time is Palafin. So if you've been around for a while, you definitely know that this Pokemon is not a good Pokemon in SV DOU. But there was a period of like 2 months, 2 or 3 months, where this Pokemon was spammed like crazy in the early I guess like kind of like late pre-home and then like the early home metagame. Like Volca Palafin was everywhere, and these Pokemon would have genuinely like the worst mirrors of all time. Like you'd be seeing like Palafin in front of Palafin, and they'd just be clicking Volca Drain Punch until one of them crit the other. It was just terrible. So definitely like kind of glad that that's not really good anymore. But it was like actually like a serious like metagame contender. I think there were people that were kind of like early on the fact that Palafin was not actually that good once we started like clicking better things with our Pokemon. But it was definitely like a real contender in the pre-home metagame. So, you know, oh, and home as well. So this Pokemon now is just terrible. Like it gets eviscerated by like both the Ogre Bonds, like especially like Wellspring, just like flip farms it really hard. And now because Incineroar's in the game, it can't greed leftovers and has to run Clear Amulet, which is just like insult to injury, right? Before you could just like greed leftovers and like the best Intimidate in the game was like like Lando T, right? And Lando T is like less of a big deal for it than like Incineroar. I think Incineroar is like a lot more annoying to deal with Palafin. So that kind of I think if you wanted to run Palafin, you have to run Clear Amulet, and that's just kind of annoying. And then just like better like spread damage, like Lando Y being better. Like you can't really redirect Sandsear Storm now, can you? So that's just kind of annoying. But yeah, this Pokemon just had the hardest fall off of all time. Like you're just never going to see this Pokemon anymore, which is kind of sad. It was kind of interesting. I really liked like you know how bulky it was with the like the super form or whatever, and also like we got better at playing around it as well. Like it was less of a big deal like committing the switch out. Like I think early on in that home metagame. But as we got better at the game kind of like got a little bit more offensive, especially while Flutter was around. And even after Flutter got banned, like the metagame is still more offensive now than it used to be. So that turn one switch to activate the Pokemon is just like it feels like it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it still is a pretty big deal. And that's ultimately what killed Palafin, as well as like Wellspring and like Incineroar being added to the game. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. I think I forgot to talk about Basquef. Basquef was like it's still like kind of around. Like Last Sex is a dumb move on this Pokemon. Like Scarf does a lot of damage, but this was like it saw the most play. Like it still sees some, but not that much. It saw the most play like in late home metagame after the like Basque-M got banned. And so that was like people were looking for a way to replace the Pokemon. It was like a decent water type. Um, there's still not that many water types in SV, but like back then it was even worse. There wasn't even Wellspring, so um, this is another like probably Wellspring victim, and also just like Roy Moon, like Last Respects is like less good now, things like that. Um, but this was like it was definitely a little bit more around in like the late pre-home or not late pre-home, late home, and so it probably could have even been banned in that because Last Respects was just that cringe in that format, but it never got that far. I think when we played the format longer, Basquef might have even been broken in that metagame, but that just didn't happen. So yeah, that's kind of it. TLDR, the biggest fall offs in SVDO history are Armarouge and Palafin. I can't believe how bad these Pokemon are. Um, let's see what else. Is there anything else I forgot? I think that's mostly it. I think everything else has just been like kind of around the same viability the whole time. I guess you could say like Pelipper because Arch got banned, but I feel like that's just like kind of cheap, kind of a cheap answer. Um, yeah, I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll probably record like Pokemon that got better at some point in the near future. So yeah, we'll see you next time.